I have a really interesting topic here. It's called, what kind of therapy is this? What kind of therapy is this? Okay, so you know what it has to do with the fourth step? They call it some people nickname it the therapy step. So here we go. We're talking about the self and the manifestations of the self. And it's talking about it, well, it's in a negative way. It's saying resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. So I just want to refer to page 7. If you go to page 7 in the big book, and what I'm getting at here is, if you notice, in page 7, Bill went into the hospital. And when he got out of the hospital, surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. So when Bill went in the hospital, they rehabilitated him, they gave him the hydrotherapy, they gave him some, the belladonna treatment, and they talked to him. And he felt that out of that experience, self-knowledge was the answer. But what happened? In a short time, he says that he was drinking, he was drunk, right? But if you go now again to reinforce that on page 27, Roland Hazard, the history of this book is so amazing. This is in the time of Freud and also Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung was in Europe, Freud was busy at the time, and Roland Hazard, in those days, it was a big feat to go from this country all the way over to Europe but he was determined, from a wealthy family. So he went over there and he said, he visited Dr. Jung, page 26. Above all, he had believed he acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its inner springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for his fall. So here we're talking about, and I said, what kind of therapy is this? So you're going to get the understanding of where we're going with this. So here, Roland Hazard and Bill went in to get better. They try to figure it out. Here, talking about the mainsprings of the mind, Roland Hazard said the mainsprings is he figured out how the mind worked. He figured he had it all work. But later on, what happened? He got drunk in no time. When we go back to page 64, it talks about resentment. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stems all forms of spiritual disease, for we have not been only mentally and physically ill, we had been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So here, in the doctor's opinion, they're talking about the spiritual malady. This is a spiritual program, right? We're talking about spirituality here. When I say, what kind of therapy is this? They had the same experience that I started to realize, no matter how much I try to analyze my problems, no matter how much I tried to figure it out through what it's called the therapy step, it just didn't work. And it's really interesting. When we go on and read, when we go to step 5, it's on page 72, and it says, now these things were cast out. And before that, it says, we have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator to discover the obstacles in our path. Here's a new way of thinking. This spiritual awakening, Doctor's opinion talked about. He said it had to be something spiritual. In We Agnostics, in all of these chapters, and there is a solution. It talks about the spiritual, and Bill realized that in his story it had to be a spiritual solution. So again, what kind of therapy is this? They call the step 4 the therapy step. So when I started to realize, I couldn't figure it out, because it says here, it talks about, it is plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads to futility and unhappiness. To the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile. Now, this is what's really important here. We found that it is fatal, for when harboring such feelings, harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns. So, when it's talking about harboring such feelings, it seems that a lot of times when I try to analyze my problems, trying to figure them out, and don't work the spiritual angle they have here, it just didn't work. Because I was harboring the feelings, trying to analyze them, trying to figure them out. It says in step 4, we look at our defects of character, we don't glare at them. So we have an understanding of them. And I have this one thing here, and it's called, it talks about, when we do our list, it says on the left side, it says selfishness, and on the right side, unselfishness. But it has an interesting thing. It says on this column here, it says no power, and on the other column, it says power. It says self-will is on the one with all the negativity, and God's will is on the other. The whole thing with this is the type of therapy I found in this OA was what it's all about. It's all about finding that higher consciousness, the God of our understanding. I couldn't figure it out. And an interesting thing, and I told you to go to step 5, it uses the word cast on page 75. It says it's cast out. When did I ever, in all the years before I came into to Alcoholics Anonymous and did this 12-step program, when did anybody ever suggest to me it is cast out? It was always, look, we got to figure this out. We got it so you have a complete understanding of why you feel this way. I have to feel my emotions, work through them, okay? So, hey, look, I'm not saying this. Look, there's all kinds of ways of approaching life and doing what you do. That didn't work for me. So I don't want anybody to feel I'm telling you how to run your life. All I know is when I did these steps, and it talks about step 1 said I'm powerless, right? Step 1 said I'm powerless. Do you get it? That has to do with everything I'm saying here. And when we work to step 4, we look at our defects. We don't glare at them. And step 5. And the interesting thing is when we do step 5, and when we tell somebody about our problems, and the whole purpose there is to realize it was not as crazy as we thought they were. Delusions and illusions in our minds, selfishness, self-centeredness, that was our problem, as it says on page 62. But the interesting thing here is that when we do the 6th and 7th, so 5th says cast it out, right? Get it, cast it out. 6 and 7 say what? What does 6 and 7 say? 6 says having the willingness. When we go to page 76, and that's where there's 6th and 7th there are. They devote 2 paragraphs to that. This is a simple program. And it says right there, look, and I always say, get that spiritual solution. I know I've been going through a round way of getting here. But the whole thing is, this whole program, I was talking to someone before when the meeting started. We were having all this discussion, and it says, said it just came down to a higher power of God consciousness. What does it say on the top of page 76? Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things we have admitted are objectionable? So when I say the topic is what kind of therapy is this, what kind of therapy is that? You go to therapy, you're trying to figure it out, right? Like Bill did, or like Roland Hazard, he went to Dr. Jung. And Dr. Jung, they tried to figure it out, and he said he figured out the mainsprings, but in no time. Maybe I'll read what when they came after that. Dr. Jung said to him, yeah, there is a way out of this. Dr. Jung, who was going in the spiritual direction, told Roland Hazard the answer. But it tells us here on page 76 the answer, and it says 2 paragraphs devoted to 6 and 7. Right? It seems as simple as we make this program, it's coming down to this higher step 1 and step 2 and step 3. If we do the 7-step prayer, my Creator, I am willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in the way of my selfish unusefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me the strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. We have completed step 7. So here we are. 2 paragraphs on page 76. And what do the paragraphs say? The whole thing comes down to what? Letting go, letting God. So, look, the whole thing is this. If you're sitting there trying to figure it out, which we all try to do, this is the way our society is with the scientific age, and we have this knowledge, a PhD. We go to school for how many years? 13, 15 years of school. That's what we do, trying to figure it out. But it's saying here that we can't. Step 4 says we take a look because we acknowledge. We look at them, we don't glare at them. Just like, so we acknowledge these things, but we can't do anything about it. We can't. Look, you could try, and with all your might, not to be resentful, not to be angry. But that's self-will. You could try, just like I go back to the diets, try to go on a diet, try to resist the food. We can't do it. We need that power which was in us all the time to resolve all these issues. Look, let me just say here, so we can, when most people, when they come to this meeting, I just want to get the good feeling I get from reading this book and everything about it. And this is the whole crux of it here. On page 15, Bill says, the joy of living, this is on the bottom of page 15, we really have even under pressure and difficulty. So when we have that conception change, when we do step 4, we see what our, look, we were selfish, we were dishonest, we were resentful, we were angry, all this, we call it the 7 deadly sins, all of these things. But we can't, our mind, our best thinking got us here. We need to get what's called on the 4th dimension, another plane of thinking, getting out of the self. We can do that in step 6 and 7. 5 says they're cast out. 6 and 7 tell us how to do it in 2 small little paragraphs. The joy of living we even have under pressure and difficulty, and it also says the most impossible domestic situations and feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. Think about what I just read here. And then it says, there is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. I'm telling you, all this stuff here is true, what you read here. The 9th and 10th step promises. 9th step promises tell us we'll have a new happiness, joy, and freedom, right? But we get out of the self. But when we're in trying to figure it out, trying to analyze it, we're in the self. And so what happened is, let me get to that, what I said I would read with Roland Hazard. But when Dr. Young saw Roland Hazard, Roland said to him, what happened? He said he just begged the doctor. He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth. This is on page 26. And he got it. The doctor's judgment was utterly hopeless. He's telling, Roland, it's utterly hopeless because Roland went to see him. He had all the therapy and everything, the analyzation, whatever they did at that time, right? This is the time of Freud. And then he went all the way back to the United States, and then he got drunk in no time. He came back all the way back over. He could never again regain his position in society. He would have to be placed himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. So he says, the doctor's telling him, but he said this man had this experience. He says, but this man still lives and is a free man. I love that phrase, a free man, right? We're so imprisoned by our thinking and our thoughts. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on earth. So the doctor tells him, if you're willing to maintain a certain simple attitude, okay? So this transformation, it talks about it on page 25, and there's a solution. Again, I always say, why do they call that chapter There is a Solution? That transformation in thinking, to realize, this is the whole spiritual awakening here. When I realize my thinking as it is now, my thinking is like totally, step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity. But that was a spiritual awakening when I realized my thinking is what society told me to think, my parents told me to think when I grew up. All of this nonsense. And back to the food, the corporations told us the way we should eat, the amounts of foods we should eat. We're brainwashed by them. So we need to be reborn. On page 63, it talks about that before the third step prayer, that transformation thinking. And he said, yes, replied the doctor on page 27, because he was begging him, is there anything you could do? And the doctor said, exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what we call vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomenon. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacement and rearrangements. And it says here, ideas and emotions, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. Suddenly. It's like a miracle. It's that transformation of being reborn and thinking. When we think it's possible, and when I knew that my old thinking was wrong, I always thought if I had a resentment or anger towards somebody, I should have that and had that understanding that, look, what they did. Now it's a complete shift, compassion, love, understanding towards these people, that whole shift in thinking through working these steps of spiritual awakening.